For years, fans believed the WNBA was the pinnacle of women's basketball, the destination every elite player worked their entire life to reach. And on paper, it still holds that image. A polished league, national broadcasts, packed arenas, and some of the most gifted athletes on the planet. But behind that bright presentation is a financial reality the league can't hide anymore. The numbers are blunt, unmoving, and impossible for players to ignore. For many of the women carrying the sport into a new era, their base salary barely scratches what most people assume a professional athlete earns. Some players, even ones with name recognition and established fan bases, enter a season making around six figures, and sometimes far less than that. The most recognizable faces don't come close to the financial power people imagine, and the paycheck simply doesn't match the value they generate every single night. This pay structure didn't form overnight. It's the result of a decades-old system that never grew fast enough to match the rising demand for women's sports. And even when the WNBA experienced major jumps in viewership, attendance, and cultural impact, player compensation lagged behind in a way that bordered on surreal. You had athletes selling out arenas, moving merchandise, creating viral moments every week, yet heading home with checks that looked more like entry-level salaries rather than what a star in a national league should be earning. The disconnect widened every time a player sparked a wave of new fans, or shifted the sports conversation on social media, or even broke broadcast records. Each milestone made the financial gap harder to explain, and harder for players to tolerate. Everyone on the inside has known this for years. The unspoken rule was simple. If you wanted real money, you had to go overseas. That meant long flights, unfamiliar environments, shorter off-seasons, and a grind that pushed many athletes to the edge. Multiple players openly admitted that their overseas contracts kept them financially stable, not their WNBA earnings. Some even made quadruple their American salary playing in leagues that most U.S. fans barely knew existed. The idea of a rest period between seasons wasn't a luxury they had. They were chasing the income they couldn't get at home, and that chase came with a heavy cost. Injuries, burnout, and the feeling that pro basketball demanded more from them than it ever gave back. What makes this situation even more striking is the way the modern sports landscape has shifted. Women's sports have exploded in popularity. Massive audiences tune in. Ticket sales spike. Merch sells out. Highlight clips dominate social platforms. And the stars leading this renaissance aren't just players, they're icons, cultural movers, and marketing machines with undeniable impact. Yet while the world finally began paying attention, the paychecks did not. The league remained locked inside a compensation model that belonged to another era, while the athletes were living through a moment that demanded much more. And that's where the tension really starts to tighten. When there's clear proof that the product is soaring, when the metrics show growth that once felt impossible, when athletes turn into household names, the financial reality becomes impossible to justify. Fans look at the numbers and assume they're fake. New viewers are shocked. And players, they're tired. Tired of watching their value rise while their earnings barely move. Tired of investing their bodies and their careers into a system that hasn't evolved quickly enough to match what they bring to the table. The truth is blunt, and every athlete knows it. The WNBA pay structure no longer reflects the modern marketplace. It doesn't reflect the talent level. It doesn't reflect the star power. It doesn't reflect the cultural force that today's top players have become. And as new opportunities begin opening in the shadows, opportunities offering more money, more respect, and more long-term stability, the cracks in the old system are widening fast. The league is reaching a point where history, tradition, and loyalty can't outweigh cold financial reality anymore. Women's basketball has never been bigger than it is right now. The sport isn't just growing, it's erupting. Ratings jump with every nationally televised game. Social media lights up whenever a standout rookie drops a deep three or a veteran pulls off a clutch performance. Highlight reels hit millions of views overnight, and every season feels like it produces a new cultural moment that pushes women's basketball into the mainstream conversation. Families pack arenas. Networks clear primetime slots. Brands chase sponsorship deals they used to overlook. The momentum is real, measurable, and impossible to deny. Yet somehow, the money hasn't caught up. This is the contradiction that defines the modern WNBA era. The league is more visible, more relevant, and more in demand than ever before, but the players who make it all happen aren't seeing the financial benefits flow downstream in any meaningful way. It's a strange split, one where the business side celebrates growth, the fans celebrate progress, but the athletes look at their contracts and see numbers that don't reflect the world they helped transform. For many players, their paycheck looks almost identical to what it was before this boom. Same base salary structure, same limitations, same capped potential. And that's where frustration starts to seep into every conversation around the league. When a product gets hotter, you expect the people creating that product to be rewarded. When viewership climbs and ticket sales spike, you expect salaries to rise with it. But the WNBA's pay system is built on a framework from an older era, one that wasn't designed for a league bursting into the global spotlight. It can handle yesterday's numbers. It cannot handle today's demand. What makes this situation even more intense is how dramatically the public perception of women's basketball has changed. Fans aren't just watching, they're investing emotionally, financially, and culturally. They're buying jerseys, debating players on social media, tuning into every game, and treating the sport with the same passion traditionally reserved for men's leagues. This surge of attention adds pressure to every conversation surrounding player compensation. People aren't willing to overlook the financial imbalance anymore. The gap between impact and income is too obvious. Players feel that energy everywhere they go. At airports, at meet and greets, at packed arenas where people hold up signs of their favorite players and scream their names from the stands. They feel the shift, and they know the demand is there. Which raises the same question again and again. If the sport is finally being treated like a major attraction, why aren't the salaries reflecting that? Why is the league celebrating record-breaking engagement while players still operate under outdated contract structures? Even the fans who once assumed the system was just how it works have started to question it. They see athletes becoming household names, yet they also read reports about players needing second jobs, sponsorships to fill income gaps, or off-season commitments overseas. That disconnect bothers people. It breaks the illusion of professional stability that fans expect from elite sports. And once people see the truth behind the curtain, it becomes difficult to accept the old explanations. The result is a growing tension that hovers over the league. A tension between a skyrocketing product and stagnant compensation. A tension between the energy surrounding the sport and the economics hiding beneath it. And with that tension comes the perfect environment for disruption. A marketplace where new competitors can step in, break the old rules, and lure players away with offers the traditional system can't match. Because while the WNBA's popularity keeps climbing, the league's compensation model hasn't made the same leap. And when a market refuses to evolve, someone else eventually will. While the WNBA held tight to its traditional structure, something unexpected began forming outside its walls. Quietly at first, then louder as momentum built, new leagues started emerging with a clear mission. Do what the WNBA wasn't doing. Pay players what they're worth, treat them like top-tier talent, and design a model that matches the modern era instead of clinging to old numbers. These weren't small projects or passing trends. They were well-funded, strategically built, and designed from the ground up to challenge the WNBA's long-standing monopoly over American women's basketball. The most talked about of these disruptors is Unrivaled, a 3-on-3 league created by star players who understood exactly where traditional systems were failing. This wasn't a side project or a cute off-season experiment. It was a direct response to decades of frustration. Unrivaled offered something the WNBA never had: serious financial upside for every player on its roster. Not symbolic bonuses. Not small incentives. We're talking real money, real stakes, and real ownership opportunities. Athletes weren't just signing contracts. They were receiving equity, meaning they had a piece of the league itself. That kind of structure doesn't just increase salaries, it changes an athlete's relationship with their sport. It turns players into partners, not employees. What made Unrivaled even more tempting was the schedule. Instead of the long, physically punishing grind of a full WNBA season, Unrivaled condensed everything into a shorter format without sacrificing excitement. Players could earn more by playing less, freeing up time for endorsements, rest, recovery, or personal ventures. For many athletes who have spent years bouncing from WNBA seasons to overseas commitments just to make ends meet, the chance to stay in the United States, protect their bodies, and still earn top-tier money was more than appealing. It was a lifeline. But Unrivaled wasn't the only disruptor. It was simply the one that proved a new model could work. Once that door opened, even bigger competitors took notice. Investors, entrepreneurs, and former athletes began studying the market and realizing something the WNBA had ignored for far too long. Women's basketball had untapped financial potential, and players were hungry for something better. That combination is a recipe for massive change. The emergence of these challengers created an undeniable shift. For the first time, players had domestic alternatives strong enough to compete with the WNBA's brand. They weren't forced into overseas leagues to earn a living. They didn't have to choose between burnout and financial survival. These new leagues weren't begging for scraps. They were offering players a seat at the table, a share of the profits, and a path to build generational wealth rather than year-to-year stability. This new ecosystem exposed just how vulnerable the old system really was. When a league has no competition, it can survive with outdated pay models. But when well-funded alternatives arrive with modern structures, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Players talk. Agents talk. The entire basketball world talks. And as those conversations spread, the once solid foundation of the WNBA's control began to crack. These disruptors didn't just step into the marketplace, they reshaped the landscape. They proved that women's basketball didn't need to settle for old salary caps and outdated thinking. They proved that investment follows value. And most importantly, they proved that players, for the first time, had options. And in professional sports, having options changes everything. If Unrivaled cracked the door open, Project B kicked it off the hinges. What started as whispers among agents and insiders quickly turned into one of the most aggressive challenges the WNBA has ever faced. Project B wasn't just another off-season league or a novelty concept. It was a full-scale professional operation built with a level of financial firepower the women's game had never seen. Backed by investors who understood both the value of women's sports and the frustration simmering beneath the surface, Project B entered the market with one goal: redefine professional women's basketball from the ground up. From the start, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a gentle competitor. This was a league ready to compete directly with the WNBA for its top talent, its fans, and its cultural influence. And the strategy was simple: outpay everyone. Make offers so large, so shocking, so completely outside the boundaries of traditional women's basketball contracts that players would have no choice but to take them seriously. Reports began circulating about multi-million-dollar deals, numbers that dwarfed anything the WNBA had ever even considered. For athletes who had spent years watching their value climb without seeing their earnings follow, this was a seismic shift. Suddenly, their worth was being recognized in real financial terms. But Project B didn't stop at bigger salaries. It went after the one leverage point the WNBA had severely underestimated: ownership. Equity wasn't an optional perk, it was a centerpiece of the business model. Players weren't just being offered short-term paychecks. They were being offered long-term positions within the league's financial infrastructure. That meant profit-sharing opportunities. That meant stakes in future revenue. That meant the possibility of wealth that didn't evaporate when their playing career ended. For the first time, women's basketball players were being treated like full-scale business partners rather than replaceable pieces inside a tightly controlled salary structure. This model didn't just attract interest. It triggered deep conversations in every corner of the basketball world. Agents who had spent years negotiating modest deals suddenly found themselves fielding offers that looked more like NBA-level numbers than anything the WNBA had ever issued. Veterans nearing the end of their careers saw a chance to finally cash in on decades of hard work. Rising stars realized they could secure their financial future long before reaching their peak. Even mid-tier players, the ones who often feel the financial squeeze the hardest, were being courted with life-changing contracts. What made Project B so dangerous to the WNBA wasn't just the money. It was the timing. Women's basketball was exploding in popularity. New fans were pouring in, games were selling out, and media coverage was expanding at a pace the league had never experienced. But instead of solidifying its position and adjusting its compensation model to match that growth, the WNBA remained anchored to the same old framework. Its salary cap sat like an immovable wall while the world around it began shifting. Project B saw that hesitancy and capitalized on it instantly. This new league represented a direct challenge to the WNBA's identity. Since its founding, the WNBA had operated under the assumption that it was the singular, uncontested destination for top-tier women's basketball talent in the United States. But Project B shattered that assumption. It showed that elite players didn't have to accept outdated pay. They didn't have to wait decades for the league to catch up. They didn't have to sacrifice financial security for tradition or loyalty. Suddenly, the WNBA wasn't the only major option, and that alone transformed the landscape. Players began to imagine a world where the power dynamic finally shifted in their favor. A world where they weren't tied to restrictive contracts. A world where their market value wasn't capped by league rules. A world where their contributions, their labor, their talent, their draw, were compensated fairly. That vision spread fast, and with every new rumor of a major signing or another eye-popping offer, the pressure on the WNBA grew heavier. Project B wasn't just a competitor. It was a message. A reminder that athletes aren't obligated to stay loyal to systems that undervalue them. A signal that the sports world was willing to pay women what they were worth if the old guard refused to. And with that message spreading through locker rooms and front offices across the country, the WNBA suddenly found itself staring at the most serious threat it had ever encountered. Because when a new league steps into the market with money, ownership opportunities, and a willingness to rewrite every rule, players listen. And when enough players listen, entire industries change. For years, the WNBA operated on the assumption that its players had no real alternatives. If you wanted to play at the highest level in the United States, you accepted the salary cap, the limited bonuses, the strict contract rules, and the grind that came with it. But that assumption is collapsing fast. With Unrivaled and Project B throwing massive offers on the table, players aren't just thinking about leaving. Many are actively preparing for the possibility. The question is no longer, would anyone really walk away from the WNBA? Now it's, why would they stay? At the center of this shift is simple math. A traditional WNBA season demands months of intense travel, high physical risk, and constant performance pressure. For some players, the financial return barely outweighs the wear and tear. Meanwhile, competing leagues are offering contracts that can multiply their earnings by 2, 3, or even more, often for a shorter season with less strain on the body. That changes everything. When you put those factors side by side, loyalty becomes a luxury very few athletes can afford. It's not about abandoning the WNBA. It's about choosing a path that protects their long-term health, stability, and financial security. Mid-tier players feel this tension the most. They're the backbone of the league, not always the headline names, but the ones who give teams structure, leadership, and consistency. These are athletes who've spent years grinding for moderate salaries while juggling overseas commitments and off-season appearances just to maintain steady income. When someone in that position receives an offer that triples their pay and grants them equity, it's not just tempting. It's logical. It's responsible. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. For many of them, the choice is becoming clearer every year. But even the stars, the faces of franchises, are rethinking everything. They've watched their value skyrocket in real time as fan bases grow and media coverage intensifies. They see the engagement numbers. They see the sold-out arenas. They see the jerseys flying off shelves. And they know exactly how much they're contributing to the league's rise. When a player realizes she is generating millions in revenue while earning a fraction of that amount, frustration isn't just understandable, it's inevitable. And when another league steps in offering money that finally aligns with her impact, suddenly the idea of leaving doesn't feel risky at all. Agents are pushing for these conversations too. For years, negotiations with the WNBA meant working within a tight, inflexible salary system that left little room for creativity. Now they're fielding calls from new leagues willing to break every traditional rule. They're hearing numbers that would have sounded impossible not long ago. And they're telling their clients something they never could before: you have options. Once that door opens, it becomes incredibly hard to close. The shift isn't just financial, it's psychological. Many players feel that the WNBA hasn't kept up with their growth, their influence, or the modern sports marketplace. They've carried the league through eras of low visibility, limited exposure, and financial struggle. Now that women's basketball is exploding, they expect their compensation to rise with it. Instead, they've watched the league cling to old structures while new competitors race ahead with modern, player-focused models. That creates a deeper frustration that money alone doesn't explain. It's about respect, recognition, value. At the same time, fans are beginning to understand the situation too. They want the WNBA to remain strong, but they also want their favorite players to thrive financially. It's difficult to justify asking athletes to stay out of loyalty when other leagues are offering them the kind of stability that could change their lives. The support from fans only fuels the momentum. Social media conversations grow. Debates intensify. People are openly questioning whether the WNBA can realistically retain its stars without major changes. All of these factors converge on one unavoidable truth. The WNBA is no longer the only lane for top-tier women's basketball talent. That changes the power dynamic completely. It gives players leverage they've never had before. And it gives new leagues the ability to reshape the entire landscape with a few targeted signings. If the WNBA doesn't evolve, and evolve quickly, it risks facing a future where its best players aren't just considering leaving, they're gone. The world of women's basketball is standing on the edge of a turning point, one that will define the sport for decades. The rise of new leagues offering massive contracts and ownership opportunities isn't just adding pressure. It's forcing the WNBA to confront a reality it can no longer avoid. Every year the league delays change, the gap widens. Every season it clings to outdated structures, the alternatives grow stronger. And now, for the first time in its history, the WNBA is no longer in control of the market. The market is in control of the WNBA. The league is now facing a future where it must decide what it truly wants to be. Does it want to remain the traditional, structured, salary-capped league it has always been? Or does it want to evolve into something capable of competing in a world where players know their worth and expect their paychecks to reflect it? This moment is bigger than a simple contract adjustment. It demands a full reimagining of what professional women's basketball looks like. Because the athletes aren't the same players from 20 years ago. They're bigger stars, bigger brands, and bigger economic engines. And they want a league that matches the scale of what they've built. One path forward is immediate, dramatic adaptation. The WNBA could overhaul its financial model, raise the salary cap, expand revenue sharing, and create modern compensation structures that mirror what athletes now expect. It could create long-term benefits, post-career pathways, and opportunities for players to build wealth instead of relying on overseas seasons to stay afloat. The league could embrace innovation instead of resisting it, partnering with new investors and capitalizing on the cultural momentum surrounding women's sports. It could finally align pay with impact, and in doing so, secure its relevance for generations. But the other path is brutal. If the league refuses to evolve, it could find itself slowly hollowed out by the rising alternatives. The biggest stars could leave first, chasing contracts that reward their talent. Mid-tier players could follow, realizing they no longer have to sacrifice their bodies and schedules for limited pay. Entire fan bases might shift their attention to new leagues offering better access, better storytelling, and better compensation for the athletes they love. If that happens, the WNBA risks becoming a developmental system rather than a premier league, a place where athletes start their careers, but not where they stay. Sponsors and networks wouldn't ignore that shift. Television deals are built around star power. Advertisers pay for visibility. If the WNBA loses its top talent, the value of its product declines immediately. Ratings drop. Arena attendance dips. Merchandise sales fall. All of this feeds back into a shrinking revenue system that makes it even harder to compete with the new leagues offering cutting-edge pay models. It becomes a spiral, one that's incredibly difficult to escape once it starts. What makes this moment even more intense is the timing. Women's sports are experiencing unprecedented growth. Money is flowing into the space like never before. Investors are paying attention. Brands are fighting for partnerships. Fans are showing up in ways that once seemed impossible. The WNBA should be the main beneficiary of this rise. It should be the league leading the movement, setting the standard, and capturing the full value of the moment. Instead, it's at risk of letting newer, more flexible leagues claim the future first. The truth is simple, but the impact is massive. The athletes have outgrown the system. Their value is too high. Their impact is too large. Their influence is too undeniable. They're not waiting for the league to catch up anymore. They're exploring their options, studying their offers, and recognizing their leverage. And once players realize they have leverage, the power dynamic shifts forever. If the WNBA wants to survive this new era, it has to move fast. Very fast. Because the next 18 months could determine whether the league emerges stronger than ever, or becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when an institution refuses to adapt to a market that's already changed without it. The future of women's basketball is being decided right now. And the stakes have never been higher. The tension surrounding women's basketball isn't temporary. It isn't a passing controversy or a momentary disruption. It's the result of years of growth finally colliding with a system that never prepared for the success it now faces. The surge in fan interest, the explosion of social media attention, the rise of superstar rookies, and the rapid influx of cultural relevance, these weren't gradual developments. They hit like lightning. And when lightning strikes a structure not built to handle it, something has to give. Right now, the WNBA is standing at a crossroads that will define whether it becomes a global powerhouse or falls behind the very movement it helped create. The league has always been proud of its stability, its culture, and its identity. But stability can become stagnation when the world around you changes. And that's the position the WNBA finds itself in today, caught between the comfort of its past and the demands of its future. Meanwhile, the athletes aren't slowing down. They're pushing the sport forward at a pace the old business model can't match. They're not just playing basketball, they're shaping modern entertainment. Their games turn into trending topics. Their rivalries become national discussions. Their every highlight becomes a viral clip. They've become cultural forces, influencers, ambassadors, and entrepreneurs in ways that go far beyond their stat lines. Yet their compensation still sits inside a structure built before this cultural transformation ever began. The pressure coming from rival leagues is only accelerating that divide. These new organizations aren't waiting. They're not operating with the same limitations or traditions that the WNBA has always relied on. They're lean, aggressive, and built for today's media landscape. They're offering contracts designed for athletes who understand their worth. They're creating systems that emphasize player ownership, flexible schedules, and long-term equity. And they're doing it in a way that forces the WNBA to respond, because silence is no longer an option. Behind closed doors, conversations are happening that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Agents are openly discussing the possibility of players skipping WNBA seasons. Stars are weighing whether tradition should outweigh financial security. Younger athletes entering the league are asking questions veterans never had the luxury to ask. Why should I commit to this system when others treat me like an asset instead of an expense? And as these discussions grow louder, the league's leadership can no longer assume loyalty will protect them. Fans see this too. They're watching every development, supporting their favorite players, and demanding the league give them what they deserve. Because when the people who generate the excitement, the stars who fill arenas and move the culture, start looking elsewhere, fans naturally follow their momentum. The loyalty that once felt guaranteed is starting to shift toward whoever offers the best stage for the sport's biggest names. In other words, this isn't just a financial battle. It's an identity crisis. A moment where the league must decide whether it wants to cling to what's familiar or embrace a new model that empowers the athletes who built the league's relevance in the first place. If it chooses growth, the WNBA could enter a golden era of visibility, investment, and long-term stability. If it refuses, it risks handing the future to leagues that had the courage to innovate first. The landscape is changing with or without the WNBA's consent. And what happens next will either cement the league at the center of women's basketball, or leave it chasing a movement it no longer leads. The clock is ticking, and every sign points to a moment the WNBA can no longer delay. The old model, the mindset of gradual change, small adjustments, and slow financial growth, simply doesn't match the era unfolding around it. Women's basketball has outgrown the boundaries it was originally placed in, and the players have become too influential, too valuable, and too connected to accept anything less than what the market now proves they deserve. This isn't a slow burn. It's an explosion, and the league is running out of time to contain it. The pressure is mounting from every direction. Players want pay that matches their impact. Fans want the stars to stay where they belong. Sponsors want visibility tied to the biggest names. Networks want broadcasts built around players who move the culture. And alternative leagues want to steal the spotlight by offering everything the WNBA hesitated to provide. Every one of these forces is pushing toward one undeniable conclusion. The WNBA must evolve or risk being overtaken by the very movement it helped ignite. The idea of the league losing its top players once sounded absurd. Now it feels closer than ever. With multi-million-dollar offers floating around, equity on the table, shorter seasons, and massive upside for long-term wealth, players are confronting choices no generation before them ever had. They no longer have to settle. They no longer have to sacrifice financial security for tradition. They no longer have to choose between burnout and staying afloat. And with each groundbreaking offer from a competitor, the balance of power continues to shift further away from the WNBA's control. What makes this moment so monumental is the fact that it will be remembered. Years from now, people will look back at this era as the point where women's basketball changed forever. Either because the WNBA rose to meet the moment or because it hesitated and lost its standing. The league can still secure its future, but that future depends entirely on whether it's willing to break from its old identity and build a model worthy of the athletes who carry it. That means bigger salaries, better revenue sharing, ownership opportunities, modernized contracts, real investment, real innovation, and a willingness to understand that the players are no longer asking. They're demanding, because they've earned the right to demand it. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about respect. It's about value. It's about the reality that women's basketball has become a cultural powerhouse, and cultural powerhouses don't operate on outdated pay structures. The world is watching. The players are ready. The competitors are circling. And the decisions made in the next 18 months will define whether the WNBA becomes the global leader of the sport, or a cautionary example of a league that couldn't evolve when it mattered most. The future is here, and the pressure has never been higher. If you made it this far into the video, you're exactly the type of viewer who cares about the real story happening behind the scenes. The business, the power shifts, the negotiations, and the future of the sport itself. And if you want to keep diving into stories like this, it helps the channel more than you realize. When you subscribe, the algorithm starts pushing videos like this directly into your feed instead of burying them. When you like the video, it signals to YouTube that people are engaging with content that digs deeper than headlines. And when you drop a comment, even a short one, it tells the system that this conversation matters. And it encourages the platform to show the video to more fans who care about the future of women's basketball. So if you want to support content that actually breaks down the truth behind the sport, hit subscribe, tap like, and leave a comment with your thoughts about where the WNBA goes from here. Your interaction genuinely shapes how far this video gets pushed. Your support isn't just appreciated, it's what keeps this channel growing. Let's make these stories impossible to ignore.